They're going to ask what you've got in shoes, in their feet. And maybe for the final panel of the day, I'm going to leave peaceably back on schedule, which will be amazing. Is there some feedback? Yeah. I don't have the skills to fix that. Oh, so I'll be back home. That was my segue. Feedback home. And if there's any feedback on the audio, if someone could address that, that would be great too. That's not my area of expertise. This is our final panel of the day. We're really excited to see you for our four speakers here with me. Actually, they're in the wrong order. I do apologise. Dr. Gareth Hughes, psychotherapist, researcher, and lecturer, lead author at the University Mental Health Charter, and clinical advisor to student lives. Then we have Professor Sandeep Ranote, Clinical Director for Mental Health at the NHS Grace Management of Integrated Care, a consultant paediatric psychiatrist leading on young people's community eating disorder services. Then we have Deborah Johnston, who is, I'm on the right page with my notes, recently been appointed as VC and Chief Executive at the University of Bedfordshire, prior to that as Deputy Vice-Chancellor at London South Bank University. And then finally, Professor Michael Sanders, who is Director of School Governance at King's College London and Professor of Public Policy. So we're going to kick off by inviting you all to share just a couple of minutes of reflections on the topic area, and anything you've heard today, or all just thoughts on this topic. And start from Professor Gareth. That's so you.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose the big thing is taking away is that the importance to remember the human bit of all this. That mental health arises from our interaction with the world that we're in and as a find it, how you interpret it. And whilst I think it would be great if we could tech or process our way through the problems that we're seeing, we can't. There isn't a magic button that we're going to be able to push to make all this go away and fix it. And I think remembering that is really important, that obviously all of this comes back to being human. Universities at the end of the day are just collections of people. And that's how they were founded, that's how they began, and that's how they continue to be. We can have universities without buildings, we can have them without computers, without any technology whatsoever. You can't have them without people. And ultimately, if we're going to really probably address this, at some point we have to wrangle with the fact that the problems that we're seeing our young people as students generally having come from the fact that they are human beings finding themselves in circumstance which feels toxic to their well-being and health. And at some point we're going to start grappling with those bigger questions. And, technology and research and data are incredibly important to help us through that. But we've got to not miss at the centre of all of that, because it's difficult to grapple.
Real privilege to be here, so thank you for inviting me. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to share a little poem to start with, if that's okay, a very short poem. It's titled Selfie by Ryan Lilston. But he has so many friends, they said, on hearing the news. And they went back through his posts, searching for clues. But no, they could find nothing to explain it away. Just a selfie, smiling and filtered from that last day. I think you know why I'm sharing that. There's a huge amount in that very short poem. The single biggest social cultural change in the last 50 years was, I think you'll all agree, has been social media. We can't ignore, and we must not ignore that in the present, in what we're seeing across the globe, but particularly in our higher education institutions and those university campuses. So I just want you to hold that. You've heard all the figures. 1 in 4 people in the UK have a mental illness. 1 in 5 university students from your reports have a mental illness. A really striking fact, some of you may be aware of, others may not. The Lancet Psychiatry in 2023, huge seminal paper done across 23 countries worldwide. It's no longer those figures. 1 in 2 people in their lifetime will suffer with a diagnosable mental health condition. If that were diabetes, orthopedic surgery, or epilepsy, we'd be doing a lot more about it. And I think that's really important. That it's here, it's real, it's neurobiological, and it's the single largest cause of disability in our country currently. It's stealing people's lives and their potential, but it also affects people across the whole globe. And we have heard from international students today, and that's a huge cohort of the people we're looking after and trying to make feel welcome in our campuses and in the country. So another thing I think that you're working really hard around, and that's important. A great thing that's happened in this country is 50%, I think, of school leavers now go on to higher education. That's absolutely fantastic, but with it comes huge problems, challenges for higher education institutions. So for me, what I want to kind of share today is the importance of separating good mental health and mental illness. And it's all got very confused and muddled. So I think that's really important to say. Of course, there's no health without mental health. I think some of your work has shown there's no robust evidence-based for single intervention that's going to build well-being and resilience. But that's because something mentioned it before, we're all human, unique and individual. It's never going to be about one intervention. That makes it challenging, but not insurmountable. And the key is going to be to co-develop that with our students who know themselves the best. They're the experts in self. I think the other important thing for me to impart is that whilst there isn't that evidence base, what we do know is 75% or just over of adult mental illness begins before the age of 25. So actually there's something we do need to do at this age. Somebody else mentioned transition. It's a very important transition when we talk about brain. And the development of brain happens till the age of 25. We now know that. So the age is between 18 and 25. I know there are people older than that in HCIs, but the majority are between 18 and 25. That is a very vulnerable brain age. So that's the other important thing. And that's perspective I've nearly finished. So I talk a lot about, it's not about revolution, it's about evolution. We have to actually evolve a completely different approach, in my opinion. And we must change mental health and mental illness to the concept of brain health and brain capital, so that we should be investing across sectors as a whole country and whole systems in brain health, both in terms of research and interventions and self-help and keeping our brains healthy. And that's huge. So partnerships are crucial, and I think for higher education institutions, you cannot be solely accountable for that. Your institute is responsible for providing education, and some of that comes with well-being. But I don't teach maths, and there's a good reason for that. I talk about, okay, I think some of where we need to place our emphasis on research and working together is defining that. What is wellness? What is illness? Or what is brain health and what is brain illness? How do we do that together? Helping our education institutions to build on their wellbeing services and offer a variety, a choice of interventions and making that diverse. So I'll just end with creative arts, culture and coaching. You've touched on all of them. I always talk about those as the new vitamin. They are the new vitamin C cocktail of prevention. And we need to do more research and actually place more emphasis there. They are the universal languages that have been around since ancient times. Those are really important reason why. And we have much better evidence-based now. They have an impact at brain, network and neural level to reduce blood pressure, reduce stress, reduce anxiety, improve mood and even improve cognitive function. So that's where we need to do a lot more there. Combining this with life skills programs, co-develop with young people, that's the foundation, and that's got to be geared with peer support. So, my takeaway message is partnerships. And I am a big cricket fan, so I've got to put cricket quote in there. A great cricket captain once said in an interview, he was interviewed and said, it's all, you're going to win lots of trophies now. He said, actually, it's not about trophies. I'm really proud to be captain of my country. But it's about building great partnerships, and once you build great partnerships, the centuries will follow. Thank you. Sorry for going over.
Thank you.
So I was going to make 3 points and sort of end, I think, with a sort of positive picture of where we can be in the sector. So my 3 points are about culture, they're about staff well-being, so they're about that institutional approach, and they're about evidence. So I want to go back to things that Sandeep and Gareth has said. A lot of the conversations that we've had as a result of the work here are about interventions. And what's important is that deeper piece, which is about trust and belonging. And again, we try to turn that into intervention some way. But I do think it's about the wider environment that gets created through all those signals and actions that students hear. And quite often, they won't believe us. And they won't believe us because we might have an intervention program over there which tells them that, their well-being is really important to us. But over here, we're doing something that's actively undermining their well-being. And it is about seeing those things together and actually understanding what the environment is that we are creating. So I do think it is about going back to deeper pieces around the culture within our institutions, within our universities, and not assuming that well-being sits off in a separate place. It's about that piece of integrated work all the way through from that very moment of application for a student. And there's lots of evidence that we can work on culture and on trust. And so one of the things that I do is I work with the Disabled Student Commitment and the University's Disability and Access Ambassador. And I've been really pleased to see that increase in the share of applicants who now share with us that they have a disability on applying. And the reason that that's happened might partly be about better outreach, but I'd say it's about better trust, because those applicants, a greater share of them now believe that we will accept their application if they share with us that they have a condition or a difference. And that's been a really long, slow process of building that trust up. It's not there completely, but it's happened through a range of messages, and I think we can look at that. So culture is important, and we've got to make sure that our interventions are actually aligned, that the story we're telling is actually consistent. I want to quickly mention staff, and I'm looking at my time already. And I want to go back to that piece of work we talk about a whole institutional approach. It's, again, really important that we work in partnership, and we work in partnership with the academic and professionals. So the staff, the people interacting with students, and think about how their well-being is created, how their workloads are created, the way that their well-being is affected by the interventions that we're putting in. And that's why it's excellent that things like the University Mental Health Charter are whole institution pieces. They're finally on evidence. If I have a worry about reports like today's report, it's that as a sector we will go back into a vortex and say, well, we don't know what works and we're stymied. Yes, thank you. And actually we know a lot about what works because we get told a lot of things by our students. And it is about opening up those channels for working in partnership. So that's what I was going to say, my 3 points. I'm going to hand over now.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. So I do teach maths, and there is one reason I teach maths. So I'm going to do the exact opposite of you, and I'm going to move away from the human temporarily, but I promise I'll come back. There's an irony to that because I'm what is euphemistically referred to in a lot of academic papers as a service user. I personally prefer the term head case, but that's not the accepted language, and I would use that term only to describe myself and not to describe anybody else or a general class of people. The reason I want to talk about maths, though, is because the data are telling us something. Right? The data tell us that in 2017, when we started producing this report with TASO and with the now dearly departed What Works Centre for Wellbeing, 6% of students in the Student Academic Experiences Survey were saying they had a diagnosable mental health condition, and that in our most recent data is nudging 20%. That's a tripling over the course of that time span. And it is not one thing. Right? It is not just COVID. It was rising before we get COVID. It is not just social media, because a bunch of other stuff is happening. The world is becoming a place that is having a deleterious effect on the mental health of our students. The relationship between mental health and well-being is also really very important. Well-being is much flatter and has recovered from COVID much faster than mental health has. There are still troubles there, but the patterns are different. And understanding the difference between those patterns tells us something about how we should respond. There is also a great deal of work that has been done by many people here and others in widening the pool of people who are attending our universities. As you say, 50% of people who don't. Given the fact that 40, 50 years ago, it was only, or more or less, the incredibly posh and the incredibly white, and skewed towards the incredibly male who went. Yeah, that expansion has led to a much more diverse, richer, better cohort of people. Not that there's anything wrong with posh white men. Worked for a lot of them. But that cohort of people is more diverse, but it is a group of people who we might describe as underrepresented or disadvantaged. And with that comes the fact that the environment we're sending them into is deleterious to their mental health, which means that as we make our cohorts more diverse, because people from less advantaged backgrounds are more likely to experience mental health challenges, we are bringing in more people who will have those challenges, which we need to be alive to. We cannot simply pat ourselves on the back and say, congratulations, you've diversified your cohort. Excellent work. You have to meet those people where they are when they get to you for the entire journey of the time that they're with you. I haven't been here all day, so it's possible that nobody has mentioned the fact that as a sector, we're not having the best time. And that leads to some challenges with the well-being of our staff. That leads to in the immortal words of Liam Byrne, there's no money left. And one of the easiest things to cut, both for governments and for institutions, is support for mental health and well-being, because we can see somebody limping through the corridor and say they need a crutch. We cannot see often the struggles that exist within somebody's head. And so we need to provide, I lost the train of thought, sorry. So there's a lot of depressing things that I've just told you to do with matters, and I'm very sorry about that. What I want to say is, what the data also tell us is that there is nothing inevitable about this. Our data start in 2017. Student awareness of mental health has not risen so much that we can just explain this by increased awareness. Social media started a long time ago. It's gotten worse. I'm not going to tell you it's not. But social media started before that. Austerity started before that. Widening participation started before that. And in 2017, the problem was 1/3 the size that it is now. That means it is not inevitable that we face this never-ending rise, right? We can tackle it with evidence, with data, and by focusing on the human. I appreciate I look much older, but I'm going to be 40 this year. Alas. Because of the fact that I'm a service user, the actuarial tables tell me that I have 12 years left. That's when I'm expected to go. I'm not going to go then, right? Eliza is going to have to put up with me for at least the next 30 or 40 years, because I have decided that there is nothing inevitable about that outcome for me. And I think we have to, as a sector, agree there is nothing inevitable about what is happening to our students and our young people, and we can do something about it.
experiencing that, Michael. Those opening comments more than incredibly powerful. Thank you. And I think there are two things that I'd really like to pick at a bit more, which are really interesting from today. And first is language. And Jane this morning spoke very powerfully about the potential that we might be pathologizing mental health in universities and the normal stress of transition of being in a diverse environment. Turning that into labels could be quite unhelpful for particularly younger people who are going through that period of identity transformation. So what are your views on that? So Sandeep, you already talked about bringing out instead, but Gareth, I wonder if you have a view on that, how you verify this and things like mental health shelter.
I want to be really careful about this. Everything that we do in the mental health space is potential to have lots of us harm, and that includes looking at this competition. And we need to be really careful what we're not saying here is to people who are experiencing distress and giving them a label as a way of giving it context and narrative explanation that your distress is not real. And I think there's a real danger in doing that, and in some of the conversations suggest that other people are not resilient, or that they're overreacting to all the stresses and so on, that actually can do that by opening downplay it. And that's the back of the conversation we were at back in the 80s and 90s when I was at university, which is, oh, check it off. It's about character, it's about grit, it's about spine. What I mean, it was none of those things. So then we have to be really careful about that. I think the other thing we've got to be really careful about is that one of the problems we have in mental health and among mental health research is you're trying to get language to do the work where it was issues. We're trying to make language do what something in hard sciences you can see and measure and weigh something. In mental health, you have to try and define. And language doesn't stay static. That's not how it works. It's defined by its usage. And so when its usage changes, it might mean something different. We will never pin down definitions to mean one static thing and hold it there. It will always move the second after we have definitions from there. And so when we're trying to differentiate between what's pathological stress and normal stress, what's mental illness and well-being, we're playing language games. We're not actually really differentiating between what those different things are. And so I think we have to be really careful about kidding ourselves that we can do that. And therefore always being aware in our research findings, there's also a bit of slippage, which is why it's so important to do co-operation work and why you do qualitative research, because when we've not done that in mental health in the past, we've had hard science talks, this was the choice. And patients say, well, I'm having this experience, and we say, no, you're not. Data says this. And then 10 years later, we're like, oh, you know what, you were right, you weren't. And we've done all that damage in the meantime. And so I just think we need to be really careful about what we were talking about. Is if that's the language you're being reaching for, to define how they're feeling, it's because it's the only language for it, you know? And self-diagnosis can both help on harm as well. It can absolutely, Jill said this morning, she's absolutely right. If it becomes identity, and this is one of the problems when I'm going to talk about mental health moment, if we compartmentalize it, so you say, I have depression, I am depressive, I am an anxious person, and it becomes permanent, then yes, that becomes a problem for your recovery. You need your recovery gets much longer, and actually really is an access barriers to it. Whereas actually going out in research is most people who experience depression come from 60 years plus. Anxiety is something you can absolutely feel without. Most of these things people recover from, they don't talk anything like this about without work. We talk way more like it's the thing. And also some of the funding systems that we have in the DHE really don't have far the same students that allow us to run a lot of conditions. If you get better and use it, it's really doesn't help. And it's defined disability, which also hurts. So I think it's really complex, but we really need to be careful about how we have the conversation to make sure we're doing it in a way which means the conversation is kind and understanding and helpful and actually moves us towards a place where we're more able to encourage you to cover about and process people for our students.
And Sandeep, how does that fit with your suggestions around issues knowledge, frame health? And Deborah, what does that mean as a senior leader? How do you work with these very complex topics?
I think the point about complexity is an important one. This is really complex. It's for every kind of view on one side. There's an opposite, and actually opposites can be present at the same time. So this is what Gareth saying. It's very complex and important for us. That's why it's so crucial to work in partnership. So we build a language that's shared, both with students and cross-sector. So we're all speaking the same language, or at least there's translation available. And we build this together rather than in our separate sectors and silos. And everything is a balance, because on one hand, it's important that distress is recognised and validated. That's really important. But equally, and also understanding that these mental illnesses are real illnesses, and there's many of them and they're different and can recover and can get better. In the same way, that's the whole clarity kind of argument. In the same way, many of our physical health conditions, they don't define you. You can live well, you can recover, and, so we need to get there with mental illness. But equally, it's also important to understand that stress response in our bodies are really important. They're normal, we need them. We need our cortisol to work, we need to feel anxious. I think I used to do like running away from fire, but that's just one example of, if we didn't have that, then we wouldn't be able to survive and protect ourselves. So I think, again, it's this idea of an evolution of how do we work with young people and young adults to start to actually think, okay, I'm recognizing I am feeling anxious, or I don't feel right, I'm feeling distressed. But some of that actually is my body working in the right way. And if I didn't feel that, it would also be a signal that my body wasn't working. So I think there's a bit of a re-education, recalibration, but we need to do that all together rather than in our different sectors.
And where do you start as a senior leader in those days?
So I think if you talk about language, I'm really keen that we move away from medicalised models. And there are two reasons for that. One is the reason that, we know that assistance or no diagnosis can lead to significant issues for the students involved, for the people involved. And that's not to say that there are not benefits in the diagnosis, but there are, it puts those students on a particularly sort of challenging path. The other part of that is the difficulty of getting a diagnosis in particular areas that are really live ones for students on our campuses right now. So I'm thinking about ADHD is the classic case. And that's it. So it's important to look at the experience that students and that they have. So do you have a student that is struggling to engage with the curriculum on their course and needs to have that material 24 hours, 48 hours in advance? Are we working with the things that the students experience, or are we insisting that they have a label? And so my preference is that we work with the experiences that the students are telling us about. And that's true even though we have to work with systems where actually we have to use different sets of information. So about 20% of disabled students get DSA, and it's only about 20%. And that is then requires them to go down a medicalised route. And that's true, and we have to work with that. But I think at our heart, we should be working with what the student is telling us about the thing that they experienced, rather than requiring a particular kind of label.
I'm conscious of time. There's also a big theme here about partnerships, I still use. So how do you work effectively in partnership in the centre? Michael, you're in an institution, you also have a blog with other organisations in the space. So what does good partnership working look like?
I don't know. I don't feel like I have a good answer. So I think openness is the main thing that we need. So I have a inherent resistance to use of clinical language to describe what might not be a clinical thing. And I've had to work to overcome that in my interactions with students over the last few years that I've been at the university, because I'm like, that when a student is telling me I'm depressed, it doesn't matter if they don't clear a clinical threshold. What they're saying really is help. But that's for interacting with students. When I'm interacting with partners in the clinical components of the institution that I'm in, or professional services colleagues, or internal or external partnerships, being open to, we have a different way of relating to what a student needs and what they are experiencing, and taking the time to learn one another's language rather than saying, well, I feel resistant to your way of describing it, or I feel resistant to, why have we got all these rules? Why can't we just get rid of them? And actually, often some of them are statutory, but so I think that start with openness is what we need, a willingness to listen to one another as well as to listen to our students.
And starting from an external perspective in universities, what can university best facilitate that much? So to say that a little bit again. What can universities, should universities be doing to facilitate better partnership working? So much that's really interesting in this discussion we've got on. But I suppose I'll take an example from Vice-Chancellor and kind of a real life example of what we did. So I don't think it's about what universities could or should be doing better. I think it's about what you just said, Michael. It's not both of us. It's not one or the other. It's about the community sector, higher education institution, NHS, industry. I mean, it's an ecosystem. And actually, I think we've got to start thinking beyond the traditional and historic sectors, silos. And that's why I talked about brain health, brain capital, growing the potential of individuals for their future and their lives, and building that shared language. So both use the term actually needs. So a needs-led approach that uses all of our languages because they're important for different reasons. So sometimes I get upset about the medical model thing, sorry. I understand what you're saying though, Deborah, fully. For me, it's a holistic, that's what we were trained in, holistic models of understanding the person sitting in front of you. And that's what we've got to do more of. And we come away from that because it's 7 appointments or, and you have the same in your sector. So there's something that I'm really advocating, teaching undergraduates and postgraduates now in mental health and medicine, which is we were traditionally trained in what's the matter with you, and you need to change that to what matters to you. And I think that's what Michael and Deborah, that's what we were saying. So the partnership approach is the art of possible, not an NHS-led or HEI-led, or it's an alliance model to develop a needs-led approach to student mental health and wellbeing. Building on what we already have, mapping out where your gaps are, what theory you need, bringing partners around the table. And once we have a perfect model, we're very happy to share those models and, collaborate on our university's student mental health service, which we're very proud of. But we still have gaps. We still have work to do.
We just need to keep trying things and keep working as well. And I'm going to open this to questions from the floor. Yes. Is there a open microphone, Zoe? And then you can say where you're from and if your question is to the other panelists. That would be very helpful.
Sure, yeah. I'm Reza. I'm from London. I'm studying at King's College London. I'll give a bit of a context to where my question is coming from. I'll try to keep short as well. It's not particularly directed to anyone, or anyone. A lot of the times from student perspective, wellbeing is custom has to like they acknowledge the stress that is widespread and the worries of harm, but they just sort of offer tools to manage it rather than addressing structural sources of this instead. Like, okay, you have a fever, here's a pill, we're not really looking at where the fever's coming from. And I know the panel's conversation, the University Mental Health Charter, all of these start to acknowledge those structural factors that are going into this. But it still makes me wonder what the ultimate aim of improving well-being is. So my question for you, from the perspective of policymakers, academics, researchers, how do you see the role of well-being in higher education? Is it primarily a means of supporting students' academic performance and producing a global high-performing labor market? Or is it more about sector-wide commitment to improving human well-being more broadly?
You just carry out the metrics.
Yeah, so I think some of what we're talking about is to the back. Someone was talking earlier what you were before. And I mean, for me, I think it's not just about actually job market. That's not what university education does. Primarily, I think it was a chair that got pulled back in 2010 to justify a fee. There's what we said, I want to get the jobs straight afterwards, so they're afterwards for. It's not. It's about getting impact on your life thereafter, and kind of changes kind of like lead afterwards as a result of what that. But more broadly than that, actually, it's about the benefit of having an educated population. When Germany was first united and they came out of this, it was still about the part of the road, how big the superpower apparently was because they were pretty lost in universities. And they changed their society. And so that's primarily the benefit of universities, but creating an impactful list to the population as a whole, which then also links itself to the world. But I think the structural thing you touch on is absolutely right. One of the things that I'm reflecting on the course of today is thinking about what do we not know in terms of research. The problem is we know those. We just don't want those answers. It's if you want healthier universities, make sure staff are overworked. Make sure staff aren't overworked and they've got time to get to know their students. Make sure the student cohorts aren't so big that students get lost. Make sure you've got a student finance system, which means that students aren't hungry and can actually attend lectures and go to councils they can afford it. Make sure that our accommodation costs aren't greater than the student finance that they're in. Make sure that there are social spaces where people can actually come together. We don't know those aspects. It's complicated. Give me a lot of that.
I think Gareth said it all, but I think well-being also means different things to different people. So we're all individuals. We've touched upon that many times. But I think Gareth answered it. For me, certainly, and I'm here sitting thinking about being here as a professional, working within the sector, but also as a parent, 3 boys, one who's graduated, 2 who are in university, and how their experiences are so different from what my experience was at university. I did go to university for all those things, which was not about necessarily a job. Okay, I was in a vocational degree. It wasn't about that. It was about living independently. It was about growing friendships. It was about maybe getting a job and understanding that with cooking, I don't know, washing my own clothes, learning life skills. And also, we've not talked about this, having fun. Yeah, some of that it feels like a burden now. So we're not having fun. And your points are well made around the workforce, the people who are doing the teaching. Being burnt out or overburdened, overworked, overloaded. And the same principles apply in our sector. In health, we're experiencing the very same issues, so it's becoming this cauldron of vicious cycle. But I believe it's in our gift. And you're right, Gareth. Whilst we still have lots of data to gather and lots of research for us to stop, we absolutely must make the case for better research and more funded research in mental health. But that shouldn't prevent us from getting on and innovating. We don't need a randomised controlled trial for everything. We don't need an sick leave for everything. But let's get on and work with people who know themselves and pilot things and put things into place. If they work, then you'll tell them, people will tell us.
I don't know if you want to actually take another question.
I had a small thing.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. So, I'm a professor of public policy, so I view university slightly differently to you. My chair's about to fall off the stage, and I want to move it. Because I've already injured myself once in the last 24 hours. A second time would seem unfortunate. So I view university as an instrument for social change. So I worked in government for a large number of people who all went to the same school. And the vehicle by which I make a world in which that isn't the case is university, right? So it is important to me that people go to university from all manner of backgrounds and thrive when they are there, and then they go into the labour market and get jobs in government so that they can be in charge. And so that is very important. To me. So I think that's what university is for, and that's why it's important people are happy while they're at university is in part so they can go and do those things and make the world a better place in a way that people who look and sound like me have systemically failed to do for centuries. The piece I would say what we can do is the basic principle in economics is that where there is uncertainty, it should sit with the party which is most able to absorb that uncertainty. So we do a book that we publish every year which says, here are all the financial bursaries available to you if you're a low-income student, any university in the country, here's what the parental income is. All of them say, asterisk, not necessarily available in your second and third years. So that means you're going into your first year, often not quite sure how much money you're going to get, but you're really not sure how much money you're going to get in your second or your third year, which means you're building up stress and low well-being for the future. And most of the time, you're going to get it in your second and third year, but it's just stressful. And we don't need to make it stressful in that way, right? Most institutions are sitting on enough capital that we could say, this is what you're going to get. We're guaranteeing you this kind of support forever. And it doesn't matter if you get better or if your parents suddenly win the lottery. We guarantee we guarantee we're going to support you in this way until you're done. I feel that would make people's lives a lot easier, and it wouldn't actually cost us any money. I'll stop talking.
We have time for just one more, I think.
Thank you very much. I spoke a lot today, so who am I? I'm James Murray. I'm the father of Ben Murray, who died by suicide in 2018. And so the last 8 years I've dedicated to confident information sharing, safer processes and policies at universities, serious incidents reviews. And I've got 3 decades in tech, so student analytics is dear to my heart, which is why this morning I was crushed when I thought that maybe we've shot ourselves in the foot. I'm now very excited, so I'm going to give you a heads up on my question, Anna. Right idea, wrong intervention. If you had one data item that you'd like to track, what would it be? And if you had an intervention to go with that, or just separately to think about interventions, what would it be? And whilst you're thinking about that, I would advise everyone in this room, great turnout, go and read Dr. Hughes's paper from 2018. It has the role of the academic there. Good people trying to do the right thing, under-resourced, stressed to hell, worrying about things like duty of care and all that sort of stuff, not knowing what to do next. Your problem statements in there, his answers in there. We now have tech like AI that can buy more time for academics to do the right thing. So let's not criticize ourselves. We've never been closer to a solution than we are now. We found the wrong intervention, and now we're going to go for the right one.
Thank you so much. And that's actually a great way of wrapping up for our panel. If you was aim to summarise the 1 day's appointment track to the one intervention, and I'd try it, because something along those lines.
So I completely get this in that question, but I take time and go after long enough. I think one of our problems people that is the point of that intervention. We should be thinking about what's the cultural change we need, what are the dangers of interventions that we for diversity of populations that we have, and what triangulation of data at different types of evidence we need to tell us the story of what's actually going on. So I think that actually some of the else rest of all that, I think about, if you think of the small scale stuff we heard about today, lots of those kinds of things doing well, allocated well, one delivered by people to work, all of how you deliver and know what they're doing. In a whole range of different ways, there's actually likely to be a solution that it goes back to essentially the thing we already found in university when I got charged, which is a whole universal approach that's being built on evidence and validation. And it's linked to this research, but actually links back to what's important in the database just to be here.
I'm going to take chair's provision and really wrapping up. So sorry, perhaps afterwards, but I'm going to press the panel to really read for their final comments so we can end at half. So very briefly, give me thoughts on that. The data you want to track and things you want to test.
Oh my God. I think, I'm agreeing with Gareth. I think that's been the pressure that we've been under in the NHS. What's the data metric? And the problem is, there isn't one single data metric that gives us the true holistic picture and story behind that individual. And that's where I think we need a set. We do need data, but the power there lies in the story of the individual coupled with the data. Similarly with interventions, I would say a good example of what not to do is what's happened in the NHS, certainly in young people's mental health. Initially has been almost solely cognitive behavioural therapy, and that is it. That is not the intervention that is right for everybody. It doesn't work for many things, it doesn't work for everybody. So again, I would say we should be pushing towards multiple interventions. Yeah.
So I'm going to deliberately just take a slice of this world that we're talking about, but it's a slice we haven't talked about much yet, which is what happens in the classroom. The teaching, the learning, the assessment, and that's the special thing we do in university. So taking that slice, you can push lots of one metric, and like the other panelists, I want to say it's more than one, but if I have to take one, tell me what I take. And look at the request for reasonable adjustment. And I'll tell you why. Because I would like there to be no or very few requests for reasonable adjustments. Why? I'd like anticipatory adjustments to be built in. And that would reduce the amount of burden that students have to face to get what they need. So it's not a perfect metric, but it tells you something. And that's the world that I would like us to be in, where we build in that anticipatory piece from the start, and we have a broader perspective of what it means to be educated within our universities. That's my one answer. Thank you.
1 minute. So I'm going to say worry and money, because almost everybody who is struggling will have somebody who is worried about them. Very difficult to measure. We can't AI our way through this, but knowing that somebody is worried about somebody would be the thing I want to measure. My very brilliant, very wonderful ex-wife does well-being at a couple of Oxford colleges, and in that system full of money, like they have scouts who go into everybody's room, and if you haven't left your bed for 3 days, then someone's going to get told about, right? Somebody is going to be worried. So that's what I want to measure: is somebody worried about this person? And the thing I want to test is money, right? It is very possible to have low well-being or a mental health challenge and be rich at the same time. But like, it's so much easier if you have financial resources, you know where your monthly next meal's coming from, you're not worried about paying rent, to manage the stress of a university life and any manner of other challenges. And so let's see what happens if we just give people some money.
To be clear, TASO is not doing that as an active part. They don't have hands to give. I just want to thank our panelists, Gareth, Sandeep, Deborah, and Michael. Fantastic class panel. I'm going to take chair's privilege just to say one last thing in my role, which is that the issue of financial restraints and other constraints on students has come up so much today. And Amanda's open last term was busy talking about one of the students learning flexibly in a store covered at work. Students not learning flexibly, the system that's not doing right by students. And I think that's really important context to all of the discussions taking place. So thank you for shining a light on that. And I'm going to hand over to Omar for final reflections for less of our panelists music.
Well, I'm finding it hard enough to summarize the final panel, much less the whole day. But I think the theme of partnership is an important one. And one reason I wanted to highlight is I know all of you are working in partnership in your institutions, and many of you have been partners with us on these projects today, but other projects previously. And actually, I am going to take that question that was asked about interventions. If you have any thoughts in the audience about things that TASO should be looking at, should be thinking about in terms of interactions, please do send them our way. I think there is more scope in this space. I think it's fair to say that the learner analytics as a tool do identify the students who aren't engaged, but they just don't work as a way to prompt a nudge for an email nudge to promote their well-being would work. But that doesn't mean there aren't things that would work to promote their well-being. And that doesn't mean that the analytics are in with the well-being survey data identifying students that will need to do better to support and target support of learning. I think I am not going to try to summarize the rest of the day. There is one other thing, though, that I wanted to do today, which is say thank you to everyone involved. Obviously, thank you to all the speakers in the first place, and I thought they were excellent. Can we have a round of applause for all the speakers, including the students who come seat. I also want to thank all of the staff who gave us great food and coffees. And the cameraman and everyone here who supported us. Obviously, we need the tech to work, to run the programs, and people, we need to recognize the work that they're doing. Also, my team, my colleagues, especially the comms team, but also the research and evaluation team who pulled together the research. This has been a long project, set of projects. I mean, 2 years ago, we thought that we were going to set out these 3 projects, and today you're seeing the fruits of that. And what's particularly rewarding is there were challenges along the way. We weren't nimble along the way. But that some of the sort of aspirations from that project have come to fruit. So in particular, we've got these different insights from the different kinds of projects. And I hope that's also for you showcase the range of research outputs that we produce. I will defend random life trials. I think we've shown the value of doing them, but I think we've also shown today that TASO doesn't just run randomized controlled trials, and that there's a lot of British understanding and indeed causal mechanisms that we can tease out within those small studies. The final thing I want to say is I want to thank Eliza. It is Eliza's last day. I've worked in partnership with Eliza now for nearly 6 years. I don't think some of you may know this, but we were incubated at the time, and we started working in COVID. And I didn't even meet Eliza in person until she was about to go on maternity leave, I think. So it was a very challenging time, but I think it wasn't a done deal that we'd be here today, producing these kinds of reports, having an audience like this, getting insights also into ultimately what we care about, which is improvements in the last. So I want to thank Eliza for all the work that she's been doing over the last 6 years, and I know she'll continue to do, both to build up TASO as an organization. But the other thing is, Eliza is a great example of work making partnership. She works greatly with the partners, keeping them on board, but also with all my fellow colleagues. Everyone who worked at TASO will miss you. You've always been a great support, and I think it's a great model for all of us. So thank you, Eliza. And I think with that, unless I've forgotten any logistics, you're all ready to go. Thank you for attending. Please do fill out those feedback forms. That's not a joke. I want you to fill out those feedback. Yeah.